What a beautiful bunch of people I have here on the stage with me this evening. And so can you guys go ahead and give these guys a warm welcome and say thank you so much for doing this? Here's what we're going to do is really kind of get rolling here this evening. I want to create a context through you meeting these people. Some you might recognize, others you might not recognize, and so you can get to learn their names and maybe how long they've been married. So we'll begin there. So start with your names and how long you've been married, and then we'll come back to this end and we'll go back through the line and have you kind of explain how you met and what the situation was when you guys met. So we'll begin with you, a friend of mine, Cynthia and Scott. So why don't we go ahead and start here, how long you've been married? And then we'll go down that line.
My name's Cynthia Miller, and we've been married 19 years in March.
Whoop, whoop. Awesome.
I'm Scott.
Awesome.
I'm Christine Yandura, and Kevin and I have been married for 27 years.
What she said.
We are Dave and Jen Bechtold, and we are approaching our 3rd year anniversary.
Wow, awesome. Can we just say congrats for your 3rd? Come on, it's good stuff. Well, here's what we'd love to do. For us to kind of really enter into your stories, it would be good to maybe have you begin by laying some groundwork for what God was doing in your life when you met. And so we'll start either on this end or on that end. Who wants to grab the mic first? All right, we'll start on that end, so we're looking bold. And so maybe lay the groundwork for us in terms of how you met, what God was doing in your lives, even how you came to meet, and maybe even describe a little bit of the situation in a concise way. We'll do that for all 3 couples so that there can be some connection with story.
Great. So my name is Dave again, and I grew up in a Christian home. I'm the last of 6 kids, and I married my first wife in college, and we were married for 23 years. And then she had an emotional affair with her high school sweetheart. And we went to counseling for a couple years, couldn't work things out. I kind of got kicked out, and then was on my own for a couple years. Did a lot of soul searching during that time, and it was really great, really great. I'm a pretty social person. I like being around people, and one of the things that God taught me during that time, I read a lot of books, and one of the phrases in one of the books was, "The cure for loneliness is solitude." And I had to really think about that a long time. I read it and reread it and reread it. I go, what is this all about? And I think that's where God stirred my heart when I was quiet before him, and finally just threw up my hands and said, I can't do this, and gave it to him. And that's when he really started changing things. Wow. So I was in a men's group, and these guys walked with me through thick and thin. And after a couple years, they said, "Dave, I think you're ready to move on." And they encouraged me to start dating. You're a young guy. So I had no idea. I was a one-gal guy. And so I said, this is 21st century. I'm going to investigate this online dating thing. And it was absolutely overwhelming. You need a full-time job to do that. And it's just crazy. And that's how I came to meet Jen. A lot of the people that I was around at that time, they said, just go out and meet other girls, don't have any expectations. And when I came across Jen, it was different. And we had I call it a connection. And it was really neat. So it's a little bit about my story.
What would you add to that, Jen, if anything? What would you say? Where were you at that time?
I also came from a pretty conservative Christian family, and my last marriage had been over about a year, and online dating is a part-time job. It is a part-time job. So I had been at it for about a year, and just probably to fill time. I didn't know that I felt like there was another opportunity for marriage for me. I felt like God had already given me that chance, and I had blown it. So meeting Dave was different. He was different than all the other guys, and we hiked Spruce Mountain and really had a heart-to-heart about marriage, and God showed up and softened my heart, and here we are.
Wow. Awesome. Love it. All right, Kevin. Kevin, congratulations. Now Southwest Airlines pilot. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Recently.
Thanks.
Awesome.
Hey, I'm Kevin. I grew up in a Catholic home. We had four kids. I was the third of fourth kids, and went to church regularly. But I really didn't accept the Lord till I was in college. In fact, right before Christina and I had met. We met and had a fairly short courtship, but we pretty much knew shortly after we had met that actually she knew, and then I figured it out eventually. But we had gotten married fairly quickly within 6 months after having our first date, and so we've been married for 27 and a half years, and we have 3 kids, and she's still my sweetheart.
That's awesome. Christine, you want to add anything?
So I was raised in a military family. My dad was in the Air Force, and not a Christian home. My parents got divorced when I was 8. My mom and my dad both got remarried to people in the Air Force, so I'm very Air Force related. And we moved here when I was starting high school. I went to college up at CU, graduated, moved back here. Was in my first job when I met Kevin. He was a senior at the Air Force Academy. We met at a bar. And our first date the next day was actually to a Bible study. That's a interesting
That is a great
combination. But within 2 weeks, I had committed my life to Christ, and like he said, we got married 6 months after we met. He was graduating, going on to pilot training. We knew we wanted to get married and said, why would we want to wait till after pilot training? That's a long time from now. And so we started our life together.
Awesome. Good stuff. Cynthia, Scott, who wants to go first?
Okay. I was raised in a Christian home, and I would say my mom was more openly Christian than my dad, though he did go to church, and he was very moral. They were married 63 years and had a very strong marriage with its ups and downs, like everyone, but we grew up in a family. I was 7 of 9, so a very big family, very rambunctious, and my parents really focused on education, experiencing life in its many ways, adventure, and having a strong faith. So my story is really long, and I'm going to skip some of it. But I was a single parent when we met, and I had been raising my daughter for about 10 years. She was 10, so most of her life I was raising her alone. And I was working for a Christian company, and I had just actually gone on my first mission trip, and that was when we met. And I just do want to say he was so tender with me as a single parent. If any of you are single parents, I just want to encourage you and say that God is with you for whatever you're doing, and He's for you.
Amen. That's good.
Yeah, she was preparing for half marathon. I was a runner back in the day, and so it was like, yeah, so she looked pretty good, and still looks great, and trying to get her to look red. But anyways, so I was the youngest of 3. Grew up in the Navy. My dad was a Navy officer, and we moved all over the place. Really my parents are really loving, devoted to each other, but they really stressed hard work. We worked hard, stressed education, getting good education, but there was no God or no church in our family. I didn't come to know Jesus until my 20s and all. So again, fast forward a few years, and I was a single dad of 4 boys under 10, and 3 to 10 years old. Wow. 4 boys, had been in a failed marriage, and I was trying to raise the 4 boys by myself, joint custody with their mother, and then also trying to keep a career going, trying to pursue my own interests. And I saw her, and the second date I asked her to marry me. She laughed. So it took a few more dates after that, but we did get married.
That's funny. So I knew Lori for 20 minutes, and I told her we ought to get married, and she said, "You're crazy." And I was like, "Nope, I just think I'm pretty decisive." And she's like, "No, you're crazy and decisive." True story. And we did get married sometime later, but not 20 minutes. It was about 45 at that point. But anyway, hey, as we peel back the layers of life, as we peel back blended family, as you peel back the layers, there have been times, and this is in part a question that was texted in a moment ago, you had conflicts. When you had conflicts early on in your relationship, perhaps they were more explosive. Maybe they were more toxic. How have you learned through the years to really not necessarily mitigate conflict, but learn and mature through the process of conflict? And we'll start with the Yanduras on this one, based upon Kevin's response to the question.
You want to talk first?
Yeah, that's a fun question to answer because we did have some explosive moments early on. And what we kind of learned, it was a marriage conference we went to several years ago. I don't remember exactly which one it was or where, but the host said, okay, look at your spouse. And we looked at each other and they said, tell your spouse or tell each other we are on the same team. And that was kind of, he's like, oh yeah, of course we're on the same team, duh. But what really has kind of stuck with us through the years is just that you do need to step back when things start to get heated. And one thing we've kind of learned is we've actually given ourselves timeouts. It's like, I'm going to go to the room for a while, you stay out here. And we kind of figure out, okay, let me calm down and figure out how I can seek really to understand what is going on and not so much like, well, I want to be right, even though I do. But anyways, you want to add anything to that?
I would just say in times that are that feel explosive, like he said, I think sometimes it's just a matter of, there have been a couple times when we've realized, like, our eyes just get open, like, this just got really ugly. And we just have to say, we need to stop. And like he said, that has always been part of our marriage, is saying, we're on the same team.
Yeah.
We're not against each other, we're for each other. So we need to figure out how to resolve that.
That's good. So based upon the message 2 weeks ago on communication, general terms, which of you would be the walker and which of you would be the one wanting to talk? You're the walker, you're the talker.
He's the walker, I'm the talker, yeah.
Yeah,
I avoid conflict.
yep, that's like Laurie and I in many ways. Dave and Jen, can we ask you, you came into this, that God has made something beautiful out of a broken story. What did you learn from the brokenness of your first relationship that you have said, we won't do that again? And we need in God's strength to never do that again. What is that?
So the short story from my upbringing was my parents were we were the Beaver Cleaver household. And everything looked great on the outside, and my parents were great at shoving any conflict right under the carpet. And we never argued. I never saw my parents fight. So I was really crippled in that area growing up. And in my first marriage, I didn't do conflict well. And I think we all know at times God has a sense of humor, and he put me in a position where I deal with conflict every day. And so I needed to learn how to deal with conflict. And fortunately, one of the most refreshing things about the word conflict in my relationship with Jen is she addresses it head on, and it's so refreshing. It's scary at first, but I tell you what, it is such a blessing to be married to someone that's not willing to let things fester, that just throws it out on the table early on, and she's taught me a lot, and we are continuing to grow in that aspect of, hey, if there's a tough conversation, I mean, I embrace conflict like I've never embraced it before, and it's been really healing.
What does that look like, Jen? What does it look like that you say, no, we're not going to let this go?
Sometimes I have to calm myself down and remember that we are on the same team, and respect Dave for who he is, and give him time, but not a lot of time. Like, you can take a break, but we're talking about this before we go to bed tonight, or we have a chance tomorrow before the kids come home, and we're going to set this hour out, and it's going to happen. And that's really hard for me. Like, I have to really, make myself relax during the time that I've given Dave. So it's still hard for me, but it's good to have somebody that's willing to throw down.
Yeah, that's good. Christina, tell me about a time where you would say God revealed himself to you in a powerful way because you were in a time maybe in your marriage to where you're like, man, God is teaching me things, or I'm learning things, or there's a gap. I know military. You've traveled, you've gone overseas. I know many in our church are military. Scott raised in a military family, Navy, and I know many stories are in this, even this evening. That can create a gap. It can create a distance. Can you speak to a time, you spoke of it briefly prior to the service, a time in your life where God revealed himself and really apprehended something in your own life?
Absolutely. This was many years ago. It was more than 20 years ago. We'd only been married for 5 years. And actually, I had been going through a lot in my extended family, and I'd had some health issues at the time, and my stepdad was leaving my stepmom, and I was feeling pretty abandoned because he kind of not only just divorced my mom, but he abandoned my brother and I as well, even though we were adults, wouldn't talk with us anymore. And Kevin was sent at that time to Saudi Arabia for 2 months. And I was really struggling because I felt very, very alone. And hadn't realized that I had a really deep wound within me of being rejected and abandoned and alone. And so at the time I was, it was in the early 90s, and the internet was coming out at first I'd ever heard of it. And I just kind of felt like, wow, I have some connection to people here. There's people you can talk to, and there's things you can do. And I could only talk to him at the time 10 minutes a week, because in the military you stood in line for a phone and you got to talk to your spouse for 10 minutes while everybody else waited to have their turn. So at the time, as I was struggling and I felt the need to really talk to somebody, I started talking to people on chat rooms, and I mean, like I said, this was all new. I'd never heard of this before. And somebody started talking to me more frequently, and it was a gentleman, and he seemed to understand what I was going through. And, you know, it was like when you hear about the frog in the pot of water, and they slowly turn up the heat, and it starts to boil, and the frog will die because it doesn't understand the temperature is getting hotter around it. Well, that's what was happening with me. I was very desensitized to what was going on, didn't understand it, kind of even in denial, but realized after a while I had developed some feelings for talking to this person, and I really didn't know what to do with it. And that's at that point that God revealed to me that I had this hole in my heart, and he had stripped everything away from me, including my husband, and basically it offered, you've got me or you can turn to somebody else. And I failed miserably by turning to someone else. But God showed that to me and said, I'm the one that's here for you. Yeah. And your husband can be gone and everything else can be stripped away, but I am all that you need. And I had to go through a lot to figure that out. And actually, it sounds really odd, but it actually strengthened our marriage, because when he got back and we talked about it, because I was actually telling about it while he was there, and he was praying with a friend, it taught me commitment. It taught me that I just need to turn to God for everything in my moments of weakness, and that there's forgiveness when I mess up. And when Kevin forgave me for that, it was the most amazing feeling to know that this man loved me in spite of my talking to somebody else.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
What would you say? And then, Kevin, I'd love for you to speak to from your view as a husband that was deployed during that, so you can think of that answer. Christina, what would you say to those in the room right now? Because there's no judgment. There is none here, and there is none here. What would you say to those people in the room right now that are living with an emotional affair? I even spoke to a couple of couples during the conference this weekend that have said this is their story, active. What would you say to the person doing the affair? And then maybe, Kevin, you could speak to the spouse.
Okay, well, I can only speak from my experience, and that is that I would say you need to stop. You made a commitment to your spouse, and even when things aren't going well in your marriage, you need to fall back on that and you need to fall back, and you need to press into the Lord. And if you're in denial about it, you just need to let people in and talk about it. And that's just really hard, because a lot of times it's just between you and God. People can talk to you, and you just might be like, no, that's not going on, but
That's awesome. That's
yeah,
good.
I don't know.
That's good. Kevin, what would you say?
Yeah, I think one of the key things is anytime I was away, I always tried to, I'd always, wherever I was, I'd go and try to find the chapel, program and try to get plugged in right away. And thankfully on that trip, I had some dear brothers that were there with me, and every night we'd go out and we'd walk and we'd pray and we'd just have time together and whatnot. And in fact, we just saw this dear friend of ours, this amazing chance meeting in Denver the other day. We had dinner with them. But anyways, just spending time in prayer. And thankfully, Christine was open with me and said, hey, this is going on. And so I couldn't pray for it if I didn't know about it. And so, thankfully the transparency and the openness that we've developed goes a long way in that. But just putting it before the Lord and trying to let him deal with my feelings and
What does
not
that
just
mean?
take in my feelings.
Explain that. It's a great phrase. I understand. But what does it maybe mean if you don't have the context for putting it before the Lord? What does that mean practically?
Well, I think practically, obviously gathering with other people if you can. If not, and it's just you and the Lord, then just really trying to spend time in his presence and just really just ask, okay, God, how did we get here? What part did I play in this? And that's actually served us a lot in conflict too, is rather than going, well, you did this and whatever, and you said this, that time out to me is important. I actually step back and I'll say, okay, Lord, what did I do in this to cause this? Or what part did I play? So I try to own my failings, my failures. And that's not easy to do. I don't like doing that, but it is necessary, and it's I think it's something God commands us to do, to seek where we've gone wrong.
It's really good. Scott and Cynthia, we've done a lot of life together. I've seen God bring your families together and make something beyond beautiful. I've got a question that I'll probably save for Scott here in a few moments to see if I can get him to cry. But one thing I would like to know is, can you speak to some times where you have seen God move or heard God speak in terms of blending two families into a new family?
There's a verse, I had to write it down, so I'm gonna look at it real quick because I thought I might forget. It is Isaiah 54:13. All your children will be taught by the Lord, and great will be their peace. And that really spoke to us, because when you put a family together, we had 5 kids from age 4 to 10. It's chaos. And when you have a big family, it's kind of chaotic anyway, right? But with a blended family, not only are you dealing with different ages and everything that goes with the different schools, but you also have them going to their other parent's house, which it just causes a lot of disorganization sometimes, and the kids will leave things, and there'll just be back and forth. And plus, they are coming together wounded. And so you're having to address a lot of things with the kids. And when God spoke that word, it was so sweet. It was a promise. And one of the ways that we saw God move was we decided to start getting involved in the youth group. And then we got involved in mission trips and took our kids on mission trips. And we would take different ones, whoever was interested in going, and we would go with them. And that, just seeing God work, we were outside of the normal day-to-day, and we were in a different culture, and seeing them worship and serving other people, getting to see what it was like to live in a poverty situation for our family. That was huge, and it really brought us together, and it gave us kind of our own identity as the Millers. This is something the Millers do, we go on mission trips. We've been going to Brazil for many years. And actually, our son is getting married this summer, and he and his wife are going to spend a month down there after they get married.
That's awesome.
Before he starts his new job. So,
That's awesome.
yeah, without telling a specific story, because we have so many, that's just the way that God has worked so significantly in our lives.
Scott, I have a question specifically, unless you have an answer based upon that previous one. I remember one evening, very pointedly, where we were in Briargate, not far from where you live, there at a park, and there was a bench there, and we were talking. I don't know if you recall, but there was this incredible desperation because of the situation. Obviously, you've got a different dynamic. Your children, in quotes, connecting with Scott, and Scott, in quotes, your children connecting with Cynthia. And I remember just conversations of desperation. Can you think of a time or remember a time where God pointedly spoke to you, Scott, I've got this?
Yeah, I love that song we sang today, "Your miracles are your memorial." You know, and what I've done is really put all these mental monuments in my head for all the times God has come through. But it's incredible because it's when you get married. I mean, getting married is hard enough. I mean, we got married, small church in Breckenridge, and went away for a week. You come back to the house, there's 5 kids staring at you. You know, it's not exactly like a normal marriage. So we had to do that. And then besides that, you know, the boys going back and forth. So really, where God really spoke is, one time he said, just pray every day. And it's simple, because the gospel is simple. And we just need to be, it's a very simple thing, is Cynthia and I have prayed every day together in the morning. It can just be a few minutes. Prayed for the day, prayed for the kids. So really just saying pray, because as Cynthia said, we needed identity, and the Millers needed identity. You know, we were all sports. I mean, sports, and you know, Cynthia and Hannah were more creative. And so we needed identity. We came here, 16 years ago, and we just gelled together in this church. So really the other thing that God's really told me many, many times is be part of the church. Participate in the church. The church. Have brothers and sisters next to you, counseling you, walking life with you.
We're going to do some text questions here in a moment, so text in a couple of questions. I've got a couple here that I'm going to ask, but this is the question where you might get emotional. I had the honor of officiating your daughter's wedding. It was incredible. You walked down the aisle holding her hand, and as I recall, you were coming undone. What was it that was going through your mind from a appreciation, gratitude? What was it that caused that emotion?
Yeah, that was a tough day. It was a great day, but I was sitting there before I went to go gather her to walk down, and Daniel's there next to me, and he's like, dude, man, what's wrong? You're really
I cried
emotional.
when my daughter got married, for what it's worth. I'm like,
yeah, it's like, you're
gosh.
really emotional. I'm like, yeah. And just really thinking about God is so good to be able to give me the privilege of being able to walk Hannah down. And it was very natural, and she wanted me to. I adopted her when she was 18, legally adopted her. But before that, we were father and daughters. And so I think just really that when I walked down, and where we got married, it was outside, and it was a really long walk, and all these people are staring at you for like 15 minutes as you walk down, all the way down there. And it's like you're going, but it just felt natural. Just blessed and honored beyond belief, and just thanking God for what he did in our family.
That's awesome. Jen, question for you. What advice would you give to a wife whose husband is in a job he hates?
So I think the most important thing is to be honest with yourself and honest with your husband about what you see. And this kind of happened to us last year. Dave was handling some situations at work that were incredibly difficult, and he wore it. But when I would talk to him about, listen, like, I'm worried. You're driving back and forth to Denver. I can tell you're super stressed. What are you talking about? I'm fine. I'm fine. So just being gentle with the truth. I often struggle with humility and confidence and how those things go together. But I found over the years that like a lot of us are saying up here, if you lean into the Lord in those times and just truly pray, give me the words, give me the timing, it'll happen. It'll happen. So.
Another question, and we'll just quickly bounce down to each one of you, and we'll start in the middle. What is the one thing that you're working on in your relationship right now that if you could experience breakthrough in that one thing, boy, it would really propel you forwards?
Communication, which I know is a very broad area, but I think probably I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but being able to kind of step back from, even in daily scenarios, we'll be sitting there and doing whatever, and then Christine will say, da-da-da, and then I'll go, and then she'll can tell I got a blank look on my face, and she'll say, did you hear what I said? And I'll go, no. So, I mean, just communicating in a way, and I tend to, like I said earlier, I tend to be a conflict avoider. And thankfully, Christine is not. She is, as you said, she takes, let's take this and wrestle it. And one of the verses that we've always held on to is, don't let the sun go down in your anger. So we've always tried to I mean, we will stay up late at night, into the night, even, I'm like, I just want to go to sleep. And we're like, no, we've got to work this out. We've got to figure this out. And so I think me being able to actually embrace conflict in a healthy way. And we also did another conference once, and they talked about how to fight fairly. And so we've always tried to do that and avoid, saying you always do this, and just trying to understand and not, just try to get our way.
Would you agree?
I agree. I mean, I think for the most part, after 27 years, we actually communicate pretty well. It's just when the breakdown does happen, it's being able to kind of come back to all of those things, because I'll admit, I mean, I'm a very strong-willed person, so when I'm not getting my way, I'm not very happy. So
I love how self-deprecating you are. This is so healthy.
There you go.
It's true for all of us, right?
Yeah, but I think for me, this isn't necessarily something within our marriage, like between us, but something for me that I would love to have breakthrough in is the fact that because we have all adult children now, we're empty nesters, is learning how to let your children go and live the life that they want to live. And even when there's things they're doing that we don't, I may look and go, gosh, I would do that differently, is to just respect that. And I think we're a good team in helping each other do that, because like if I start becoming a little unglued about something, and he kind of helps to tone me down, and vice versa. So I think that's good, is that we're helping each other try to let go of our kids.
That's a panel conversation right there. How do you launch good kids? Let's go with the end. Dave and Jen, what would you say is the one thing that if you could solve it, boy, it would propel you forwards?
So you stole mine. I think communication is one of the big ones for everybody, but as you guys were talking, I was trying to think of, what is it about the communication piece specifically? Like, how can we bring it down to a more 2,000-foot view instead of 5,000-foot view? And I think Dave and I have had some really awesome conversations about awareness. And in the conversation, is it a good time to have this conversation? Am I choosing the right language that Dave can understand? The flag thing this morning was really cool. I couldn't wait to get home and do that. And we dug into that, and just really being intentional around when, where, and how share the information.
That's good.
I think it's important. It's always, we hear this, it's cliche saying, try to put yourself in the other person's shoes. And I think that's really important to use, like Jen said, use the language that the other person can understand. And sometimes we say the same word, but it means different things to each of us. We got to unpack that. But it takes that second or third, say that one more time, or help me understand that. And so those seemingly 5-minute conversations can end up being 30-minute conversations, and it can be challenging.
Yep. Last, but no means least.
Okay, I would say the same thing. Communication.
You have to say something. No, I'm just kidding.
I'm a very abstract, emotional. That's how I look at things. I'm creative. And Scott is very concrete, logical, and so he works in finance, and so we're very different, we're opposites. And so when we talk, sometimes I look at him and he doesn't understand me, I don't understand him, and if we could learn, and we are learning, to give each other the time to explain, maybe explain again, like you were saying, it takes a little bit longer. And also, I can get impatient sometimes if he doesn't understand me, and so that's just something that if I could just stop doing that, that would be great. Propel us forward. But yeah, I think that, do you have anything to add?
Of course. No, I think you just
Let me guess, communication?
just overall, just as you think through life, what's your most important thing is your relationship with Jesus. That's what you have to make sure is right. But the next one is your relationship with your spouse. And then third is your family, fourth work, fifth your personal interests. So just thinking through, am I really putting Cynthia second behind Jesus? And that's what I really want to be doing. And I think that would really help with the communication, because when she's talking and I'm half listening because I'm thinking about work, I got to shut off work and listen to her 100%.
Yeah. It's true for all of us, right? We sometimes sit here and we go, man, my story is so unique, and yet our stories are so similar. Thank you so much. All right, why don't we give these guys an awesome warm welcome? Come on. We're so excited about this weekend because we're able to really dig in some content that all of us can relate to. We started this last night with 3 different couples. The next 2 services will have 3 different couples, so 6 more new couples throughout this weekend. Here's what's so good about this kind of a conversation is you can really peel back the layers and talk about marriage, family, parenting, and really dig into some of that great content. Last night we had a big discussion about even emotional affairs, and so we'll be posting that content online. So if any one of you in the room have struggled with that, or struggling with that, go online and try and get even last night's content where a military wife shared her story of her husband's deployment and how her struggle was emotional affairs during that time. I feel really stirred to share that even right now. This morning, we're going to go through and we're going to ask a series of questions. And so I'm going to begin with you guys on the end there, Sam and Susie. Why don't you introduce yourselves? Tell us how long you've been married, and we'll just bounce down the road. Maybe just one of you, the wives, go ahead and introduce yourselves and say how long you guys have been married.
Okay. I'm Susie Epperson. This is my husband, Sam, behind me. We've known each other 38 years, and we've been married 30 years next week.
Awesome.
So,
congrats. Love it.
yeah, we met. Thank you.
Awesome.
We met in North Carolina. Both our dads were in the Marine Corps, and our dads were stationed at the same location, so we met there. And when I was 12, I met him. He was 15. We started dating on my 13th birthday, which I don't recommend for your children. And I did not allow my children to date that young. However, we met very young and had lots of things in between happen, but here we are almost 30 years later.
Awesome. Chelsea.
My name is Chelsea Bonini. This is my husband, Jason. And we have been married for 6 years, together for 10 years, and we met in college.
Awesome. Olivia.
I'm Olivia Fugler. It's my husband, Tommy, and we were kind of high school sweethearts, and we've been married for 13 years. And my husband's in the military. We've been in the military for 13 years, and we're here, and we've made it.
You made it. And we're neighbors somewhat. We could probably throw a rock at each other. And Olivia ran me off the road the other day, actually, true story. She was cursing, blessing the Lord, because there was a slow driver in front of her. It happened to be me. The oddest part of this entire story is the fact that I was the slow driver in the story. That's just the oddest part of the story here. Your husband told me a private story. How did I hear that? Anyway, hey, why don't we go back to the front of the line, and why don't you go ahead and share, and maybe, Sam, you can walk us through. At this point, I'd love to hear kind of a concise summary of what was going on in each other's lives when you met.
Okay, so he said concise.
That
means
concise.
Keep it
That can be
brief.
2 minutes. It's fine.
Right. Okay, so interesting. Susie and I met in, I was just getting into high school.
Okay.
She was in middle school. I robbed the cradle because I didn't like what I was seeing around me at the time. So
That's what Laurie said about me.
Interestingly enough, yeah, this is in Swansboro, North Carolina, near Camp Lejeune, where the Marines are stationed. I was playing football in high school. She was a cheerleader, kind of the all-American thing. but I actually dated her sister first.
Oh, this got real.
Yeah, it just got real. However, that was for about 2 weeks, and I said, this girl is crazy. And then I met this young lady and said, your sister's crazy. She said, yeah, but I'm not. And she was right. Yeah, she is out of the 4 kids in their family, she's the stable one. So
That's funny.
made the good pick. So what was going on in our lives at the time? Both of our fathers were in the Marine Corps. Mine was essentially non-existent at the time. He was gone a lot. My parents had just divorced, and I was an angry young man, fighting through that process. So she was somewhat of a comfort in that particular time.
Wow, thank you. The reason we're doing this is because it will create questions, because people will go, oh, I can relate to him or her. All right, Jason, bring it.
So Chelsea and I were both in college. I'd say we were kind of your typical, we grew up in church. Our faith wasn't really our own, I would say. And we were just kind of party kids in college. And I think that we were both kind of coming into our faith at that time separately. And that was kind of a launching pad for our journey the last 10 years. That God kind of just met us where we were, and both kind of a couple messy 20-year-olds who just wanted to party, and now here we are 10 years later.
It's good stuff. Who's going to speak?
Yeah, so Olivia and I met in high school, freshman year. I was getting on the bus to go to a Mexico mission trip because we're from California, and she was telling a friend of hers, hey, I can flirt with another guy and kind of, get his beanie or get whatever I need. Just watch this. And I happened to walk in at that exact time.
She's
and
like,
so
are you really
there we
telling
are
this?
going to serve Christ, and that's how we met. But she got my attention and couldn't get rid of it. And so, we didn't start dating until college, but we were close through that time. And, going into high school, I was coming out of a Christian family, so was she. And my family was very events-oriented with not much intimacy. And so what we did was more of who we are rather than who we were as a family. And so I found depth in Olivia. She was coming out of a family where her dad worked all the time. Her mom had a lot of insecurities that really kind of tore the family apart. And so she felt a lot of abandonment growing up. And so we just connected through that. And, growing up through high school, we were so mature, right? She was smart enough to deny me the ability to date her freshman year, which was good. So we didn't start dating until we got into college. And that's how God brought us together.
That's awesome. Love it. Love it. I need to get Olivia a microphone while Tommy's talking. Because there's a lot of commentary going on here. This money right here. It's just money. All right. Let's go to the middle. Let's go Jason and Chelsea. Whenever we get married, there's always differences in terms of husband and wives. They're different. Different story, different temperaments, different makeups. You can have the creative and the logical. You can have the peacemaker and the crisis creator. You can have all different people. What have you worked through in your relationship to where you're different, to where your differences were revealed, healed, and now you would say, man, this is an ongoing thing that we're working on, but we're so different and we always come to things from a different angle?
So we could not be more different.
Oh.
So I'm really high-strung, I run hot. She's really passive and peaceful and calm, and I think something that we're going through right now is I've dealt with my entire life with anxiety and stress, so this is awful for me, by the way. But over the last 18 months or a couple of years, it's gotten a lot worse through just a series of events. I think having kids, and I've been kind of pushed into a management role at work, and I'm not sure I'm comfortable there. And can I lead people my age? Can I do these things? Do people respect me? And I think a lot of it is I had a really well-intentioned attempt to fix some things about my life, and that kind of actually pushed me in the wrong direction to where I started just obsessing over every conversation and event that I had, to where I really wasn't comfortable around anybody, my closest friends, my family, except for Chelsea. And so in the last year, I've really pushed people away, not really on purpose, but I've pushed my closest friends and family away because it's easier for me to just be in isolation. But I realized over the last couple months, God has done some really crazy things and just is really showing off. And I've realized just some things that he's taught me is that, these are lies of the devil that I'm believing, and that the devil wants me in isolation.
Wow.
And if I'm in isolation, then I can't do God's work. And I've realized that I'm not going to do that anymore, right? So instead of not telling anybody what's going on with me, some of my family are sitting over there now hearing this for the first time, but instead of not telling anybody, I'm just going to tell everybody now. You know, it's a big take that to the devil, and I've realized that I can answer God's calling on my life if I'm not in isolation. He doesn't want me in isolation. And so now I'm at a point where I'm ready to turn the other direction. So he's been swinging at me. He's been knocking me down for a couple of years, but he didn't knock me out. He didn't deliver that kill shot, and now I'm back up and going.
That's good stuff. Come
and
on.
I think it's huge for my family, and I want to help other people. I want other people to realize that you don't have to be in isolation and struggling through these things. I don't want this for my kids.
Wow.
I don't want them growing up seeing negativity and anxiety. I want them seeing somebody who's confident in God and confident in their faith. Wow. And I want other people to realize that also.
Ooh, preach. Come on, that's church. Come
Sorry.
on. Good stuff. Chelsea, with you then being so different, how were you able to validate Jason in where he was at while at the same time encouraging him from a different view?
So that was the hard part because I am more of the easygoing personality. A part of me was just like, it'll be fine. We'll get through this. It's just a phase. And then days went on and on and on, and he would wake up every single day, questioning what did I do yesterday that I should be upset with myself about. And there came a point where I just realized I needed to dig into this deeper with him. And I began to get frustrated at times, and I still pushed it aside, and then finally I kind of just decided, it took me a while to take it to God and just really pray about it, and the frustration would melt away and I'd be okay, and I knew God had it and he had a plan during this time and that we would get through it. So I just try to be there for him, and I don't have all the answers. Most of the time I don't have anything to say. It's just listening, giving him my listening ear, and supporting him through his struggles and being there for him. So I think he appreciates that too. I mean, I'm not the counselor. I can be at times, but most of the time it's just, listening to what he has to say.
That's good.
Yeah.
Say that out loud. You're a walker?
I said, she's the walker, I'm the talker.
Yeah. From 2 weeks ago?
And that was a good lesson we learned because we do try to communicate a lot, especially since then. We've been working on it. So I've been trying to talk more.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Me too, in my relationship with Ori, which is ironic, isn't it? Sam and Susie, can you tell us about a time in your lives, in your marriage, where you barely made it and where God bailed you out?
Sure. Yeah, where do I start? So, about 30 minutes ago, pulling into the parking lot.
Hey, you've been rehearsing that line. You pulled it off well.
So this was my BC days, my before Christ days. So my wife is a backslider. She was saved, I was not when we were married. So a little bit of evangelical dating there, I think, for a little while. That lasted great for about 2 years, and 2 children later. We went through a pretty tough period of time. I was a lieutenant in the Air Force at the time. I was brand new, and my focus was on doing what I needed to do to be good, to look good, to do good, and to be the best. Right? I mean, as most of us, type alpha males, ISTJ personalities, et cetera, coming into the service. And as such, I was neglecting home. Right? I was doing what I had to do at work, and then and I expected them to come along with that. So it was all about me. That did not play out very well. That lasted for about maybe 2.5 years before we ended up separating. And we separated for 4 months. I stayed in Montana, Great Falls, Montana, where I was assigned at the time, and they went back to South Carolina to live with her parents for about 4 months. And that was tough. And then I realized that I better get my act together. And we both had some things we had to work on. So God moved, despite the fact that I didn't know that at the time. Now hindsight being 20/20, or sometimes better, I see how he moved. And what an amazing blessing. And a woman with some incredible patience. But we realized that we had to fix this. We have to fix. There are other people involved, children involved.
Yeah.
And at first it was about them and it was for them.
Yeah.
So she came back, and divine intervention occurred because about 6 months later, after she came back, we fell in love all over again. When it stopped being about us, about each of us. And when we started doing this together,
Come on.
God moved in a mighty way. It wasn't
Wow.
long after that I realized that God moved in
Wow.
a mighty way, and I gave my life to him.
Wow. Susie, what was going through your heart during that chapter? What would you say to women as well that are maybe going through that chapter?
It's funny because we have similar personalities as you all, and it was very difficult for me because he is very type A, very strong. I'm more passive, don't like to have confrontation. I mean, I could give him the silent treatment like running a marathon. It would be a week, literally, at a time, which isn't healthy. But and I still struggle with that today. But it's not a week, maybe just a day. But it was really difficult for me because he was very focused on his career, and which was our livelihood, so that was important. But he had forgotten, as Mark said, to come back and save the girl. So it was difficult because he was working, 12, 14 hours a day. I had 2 small children at home. He wasn't a Christian. Although he grew up in church, he didn't actually give himself to the Lord, his life over to the Lord until he said, when he was older. So just lots of challenges for me, and raising children alone and not having a partner to help with that.
Were there times where you were like, we're done, it's not worth the fight? What prevented you from following through?
2 things were my girls. We had 2 children at the time. Jamie's sitting in the front row right here, and we had Christina, who lives in North Carolina. But that was our main focus. Well, mine specifically, I wasn't sure what he was thinking because we weren't communicating. But my focus was the children. We really wanted to try to get back together and work it out for them. And then when we got back together, as Sam said, we started focusing more on each other, and he came to know the Lord, and things just started changing because when Christ is first in your marriage and your life, your relationships, not that you're not going to have struggles, but your relationships are going to work out much more easily.
Yeah, that's good. Some questions that are coming in. You can decide which of you want to tackle these questions. First one is, regarding prayer and growing together spiritually, are you doing a quiet time together, and if so, what do you do? All right, Jason.
I'm just getting the mic in my face. We've actually struggled throughout our marriage learning how to pray together. I think we can do it separately really well because it's, you've done that your whole life. But we started this year doing a study on Acts together, which is just kind of nice. It gets us both in the Bible. It keeps us both accountable. And it's really just this journey between that and dealing with, what I've been dealing with the last few months and what God's doing. It's really helped our prayer life more, where we try to focus less on we should pray for this person and this person and this person and this person, and we kind of just pray. It's take the pressure off of it a little bit is what I would suggest, and then make sure that you are spending time. That the sermon a couple of weeks ago, making sure that we are carving out time for each other. I think that's a big part of it and helps in our prayer life.
And you answered the other question as well, is how do you overcome the vulnerability to pray together? And you've spoken to that a lot as well. Tommy, I've got a question for you or Olivia. Let me choose which one I'm going to have you do. What is the best prayer to keep praying for a spouse that's unsaved who has no desire to come to church?
Let's see. So I would just say that they would experience Christ. That feels powerful to me because I grew up in a Christian family, but my sister does not walk with the Lord. And she's open about that, and that's okay. And she's walked through extreme pain. Every time I think she hit the bottom, she bounces again and goes further down, whether it be alcohol or drugs or relationships. And I've struggled with that, So yes, it's not my spouse, but I think the thing that Olivia has always encouraged me for is to be real to her, because she's hurt me so many times.
Yeah.
I feel like I haven't had a sister for a decade.
Wow.
And so that's painful. So I can't imagine if it's a spouse. But at the end of the day, I can't sit there and convince her of anything. It's the work of the Holy Spirit in her life. And so we just pray that she encounters Christ, whether it be through real conversations with her, me being honest, which is hard sometimes because it's hurtful, or praying that God brings people into her life directly and that she faces who God is in a way where she'll experience who God is.
That's good. That's good.
Rather than pretending and washing over what she's going through. So
Good stuff. Good stuff. You wanted to add something?
Yes,
Yeah,
please.
go ahead.
Sam was not a Christian when we got married, and so I would like to just give my little take on that question. Devout prayer. I mean, lots and lots of prayer. And I got to the point where I prayed for strong, macho Christian men because Sam thought Christian men were geeky. He honestly thought, like, I can't be a Christian, they're geeks, or they're dorks, or they're not macho. And so I literally was silent. I got to the point because I would try to talk to him, and my education level is, I graduated from high school, but I don't have a lot of college under my belt. I have been going back to college recently, but I don't have a lot of college under my belt. And so anyway, I think he needed the education piece of it, the intellectual part of it. And so I prayed for strong Christian men, macho Christian men, and I can literally think back in my mind at least 5 strong men, doctors, and just professional men who are, men's men who came into Sam's life and spoke to him and just guided his life. And here we are today because they made a difference in his life.
That's good. Chelsea, got a question for you. The question came in, how would you encourage young adults to trust God when they're not married, when they feel like an outsider, and they don't have kids, and they ask the question of, do I really fit in?
Okay. Sorry, can you
Yep,
paraphrase that again?
I rephrased it part as I read it,
Okay.
so it will likely sound different the second time. Can you speak to young adults that trust God, but are really learning to trust God more when they're not married, when they feel like an outsider, they don't have kids, and they question whether they really fit in? Does that make sense?
Kind of. So they do trust God, they just don't know where to fit in.
Yeah, and they're asking the question of God, are you ever going to provide someone for me?
Okay. I think placing yourself in those opportunities is a big part of it. So when I was in college is when like Jason said, is when we kind of really started to learn more about our personal faith. And I didn't know where to start. I knew there was a God. So I just found different communities that I could be a part of, and meeting those people who really helped speak the word to me really helped in that area.
That's good. That's good. Question for Tommy and Olivia. Olivia, maybe for you, or maybe give the mic to Tommy because he asked me to ask you this question. I don't know if you were serious, but we will test the theory. Oh, okay, good. Well, then we'll go with that because I do too. Last weekend we spoke about sexual intimacy. We spoke about even how you can maintain a sexual relationship among a married couple during everything from deployments, busyness, you've got small children. This is kind of an abbreviation or a hybrid of a question that did come in. The question was, how to a military couple do you remain spiritually married while spending so much time apart? So maybe you speak to the spiritual part of how do you maintain that vibrancy when you're apart, and then Tommy, you can answer the question of how do you maintain sexual purity when you're deployed away from your wife?
Wow, that's a really fantastic question. When you're apart a lot, it's crappy.
Yeah.
It's hard. And, people like to tell you, you're strong. You're a military wife. No, I'm not. And it's really hard. And I think always being open to communicating, being flexible. I know that when Tommy was gone a lot, you would hear a lot of women, he didn't call me today. He didn't call me today. And, you have no idea where they are, what they're doing, or if they got back from a mission okay. And so I think it's just being available, praying. I feel like praying a lot, having each other on each other's mind. For me, thinking about my husband, trusting him. I do trust him. I trust him amazingly. Even if there is, temptation outside. I know that a big part of, when you spend so much time alone is preparing for each other, making space, because a lot of times when we're apart, it feels like, I kind of have to learn how to do life alone and enjoy that. And that's kind of hard because I really like my husband and I think he's really fun. And when he's gone, it feels like a big loss out of the whole household, even for the kids too. And kind of still engaging in, this is what daddy's doing. We had a really big chain around the house, which I actually shouldn't have done, because it kind of showed you how long he was going to actually be gone. It went around the entire house. And the kids would take something off every day, and we'd pray for him. We'd think about him, write letters to him. I think just keeping connected in our minds, in our hearts, and praying for each other. I mean, I know that sounds kind of weak.
It's not weak at all.
But I think when you come back together and you allow flexibility, I think allowing flexibility, because he goes through all these different things, and he comes back a different person, kind of. He's in this guy mode, and that's okay. I'm in mom mode, and I forget to give him time when he comes home, like a few hours of like, hey, I need to relax and not keep cleaning the house. I should just sit down and ask him how he's doing, or watch a movie with him, or really spend time just being together.
So your question, Tommy, is you can speak to either angle of this question. How do you maintain your own sexual purity while you're deployed? Yeah. And or describe how you maintain the sexual part of your relationship with a busy life, busy career, busy mom, lots of kids, etc.
Well, we can speak to both of that from our experience in Japan. So about 5 years in, so I'm a pilot by trade, and I was stationed in Japan. And for those 3 years, those were the darkest years of our marriage. Not just because of deployment. So I was only home a year and a half out of 3. And when I was home, I was working 14-hour days trying to, keep up with all these type A fighter pilot personalities in the squadron who were all trying to be high achievers, and there's a great cost when we don't do things well. And so there's a lot of pressure with that. And then I was doing a master's on the side, and oh, by the way, we had 2 toddlers. And so it was just all of that just coming together and just trying to take from us. And so with deployments, that was difficult. Really struggled there because there was a lot of pornography when we were deployed. And I hadn't had to face it like that. And I felt alone at first. And the best thing that I could have done that whole time, which I did, but not at first, was to tell Olivia. Because for us, the greatest passion that we feel, that we've experienced, both in the darkness and in the light, is keeping things in the light between us. Continuing the communication, even if it's me telling her I screwed up, not like, oh, it's all great. Because then it leaves her wondering, and when she's wondering, that trust starts to degrade. Yeah. And so that distance is already there because I'm physically not there, but where does she know my faithfulness is to her? Yeah. And so when I felt alone in that, I found people. God provided Christian pilots to come alongside me so that we had accountability, but that's just not enough. Like, I can't just depend on other men. I need to depend on my wife and have her and I be in the fight together. And so when it comes to being home now and not being on deployments right now, we got a 10, 7, and 2.5-year-old. Life's busy. Yep. You say teenagers, it feels like we have one because our oldest is a girl. No offense. But she's awesome, but at the same time, like, it's like, oh, she needs to do ballet and he needs to do taekwondo, and there's all these school things. And there was all this going on, and even last semester, we felt overwhelmed. Like, we had one night together as a family. And what that did is just took from us. And so we decided to say no. And we started saying no to a bunch of things and giving them one thing that they got to commit to and pour into. And what it did is it gave us family time, but it also didn't have her and I running across town back and forth to where we had, what you were talking about last week, space to connect, to converse, and to have intimacy and have sex that we knew each other, And good. So the combination of those two things we've had to fight for because everywhere we turn, we need to do this, we need to do that. And we don't need to. We can say no to things so that we can say yes to our family.
Good stuff, man. Keep the mic, Tommy, because this next question is perfect for something that I know you're passionate about. Somebody asked the question, in what ways are you involved at Mountain Springs? What programs or opportunities would you recommend where my wife and my kids can serve together?
So we've been at Mountain Springs for about a year and a half, and we moved here just coming out of moving across from Turkey back to the United States because our 2.5-year-old was a high-risk pregnancy and he was supposed to die. And he lived, praise God. And so God answered our prayers of stability because we're on our 13th move in 13 years, and that just takes a toll. And so when we got here, I wanted my kids to be plugged into a church where they were loved, and I saw that. And so I got involved with the youth ministry here, for the children's ministry specifically, Treehouse and Propel up there. I helped serve up there because what happened at that time is we gone through all of this high, fast-paced intensity, and I come home and I'm still struggling with anxiety. I was still struggling with being short with my kids and being frustrated for reasons I shouldn't be. And so I realized, well, if I just serve other people's kids, I'm going to have the opportunity to know how to treat my own kids. And so that's why I got involved, is because I needed to be reminded of how to treat my kids well by treating your kids well. And that's been huge for me, but it wasn't just about what I was doing. And so I tried to create space for Olivia to get involved, and she's been a part of the prayer team and a prayer ministry on Thursdays. And so it's not about, we don't necessarily have to do everything together, but we're a team with 3 kids. We have to create the space for each other to serve in our giftings.
That's great.
And so we've been able to find that without just jumping in.
That's great. All right, last question. We only have about 4 or 5 minutes left. Let's start on that end. We're just going to come down this line. I'd love for you to speak to and converse together quickly if you need to. What is the one thing that you've got to work on in your marriage to take it to the next level? What's the one thing? If you said, man, if we could get victory in this one area, it would really move our marriage forwards. It would have consequences positively in our kids' lives, grandkids' lives, etc. One thing.
I'll let you answer that.
Yeah, so that's a great question.
And I can stall for you if you need me to.
I don't think so.
Share an area for Laurie and I even.
Yeah, so the one thing is a really good question, because our marriage now, coming up on 30 years next week, has never been better than it is at this point in time.
Wow.
So I am not sure what that is. Now we're about to test our marriage and our faith a little bit, because we talk about stressors, right? And I think so the number one thing is knowing what our stressors are. But in that top number of stressors, top 10 or 15, whatever it is, one is selling a house. We're getting ready to do that. One is buying a house. We just did that. Moving to a new location is that. And starting a new job is that. And I just did that. So.
And you're going back to college? Yes. Oh,
so,
no changes whatsoever.
So we have a few things that will test our faith from time to time. But honestly, what is the one thing we have to work on? I think it's just maintenance at this point, and that is maintaining our communication and focusing on each other, making sure that we have our vertical relationship right first, and then our horizontal relationship squared away as well.
Good stuff. Jason?
I think for us, it's the spiritual intimacy part of things, and I think it's learning how to pray together. We have a 2-year-old and a 6-month-old, and I work a lot, so we're always on the move. She stays home with the kids and works part-time, so she's busy. So I think it's taking that time to model it for our kids. You know, we've realized in the last couple of weeks that we pray with our son, but we don't pray over him. You know, in the last couple of weeks, we started praying over our son. And so, you know, it's at night, and he fights us, and he kicks and says, "Dad, get out of the room. I don't want you here." But we just do it anyways, right? And it's putting your hands on him and physically praying for him. So I think it's us getting that spiritual intimacy so that we're modeling it for our kids, because I don't want them to grow up in a house where we just go to church on Sundays, but then it's not in the house. It needs to be more a part of our conversation and our actions and our movement and how we love each other.
That's good. Awesome. Last one.
I would say we've been so close. Like, stability helps that. But vulnerability. Like really saying, not just praying, because we do pray together, and Tommy will tell me what he's learning. I'll tell him what I'm learning, but to say, I'm really struggling with my pride and being able to say, I'm sorry, when I know I shouldn't have talked to you like that in front of the kids, or I shouldn't have gotten angry about that. That was silly, that was stupid. Just being vulnerable about what even God's doing in the depths of me, and saying, can you pray about this? And actually letting those deeper parts of you that really you don't want to share with anyone, you don't even want to even pray out loud sometimes. It's that personal. To bring that to Tommy and talk about it and ask him to pray about it with me and be a part of my team.
It's really good, really good. Great. We'll start on that end, and just maybe at this point, Pat, go ahead and introduce yourself, and Dick, or Dick, if you're the one with the microphone, maybe you should do this. Just go ahead and say how long you've been married and your names, and then we'll go back to you guys and have you share what was going on in your lives when you met. So just names at this point. Names and longevity of marriage.
We're Dick and Pat Sevitz, and we celebrated our 53rd anniversary in September.
Woo! That's awesome. All right.
I'm Jennifer, and this is my husband, Kevin, and we've been married a little over 23 years.
23 years, love it. Kevin and Jennifer are actually members of Woodman Valley, but dear friends of Laurie and I, and maybe some of you in the room recognize Dr. Weary because of his role in our community. He is single-handedly populating, certainly bringing forth life into our community. How many women in the room go, yeah, I recognize the Wearies right now? Okay, look at those hands, Kevin. Look how much accountability there is right now for what you're about to say. All right, let's go right here, right now. Are you saying as well?
Our first baby was delivered
awesome.
by
Love
Dr.
it.
Weary.
Nice. Did you? Yeah, love it.
Yeah, so we're Zach and Ann Moore, and we just celebrated our 10th last June.
Awesome. Congratulations. Love it. All right. Here's what we're going to do. To kind of lay the groundwork for stories, here's the reason we're going to lay the groundwork. Throughout this next 30 minutes or so of conversation, we're going to invite you, the congregation, to text in questions. And so what we want to do now, you'll see a number on the screen here momentarily, is texting questions that you might have specific to their story. Well, you don't know what to ask if you don't know their story. So can you share with us, maybe concisely, 2 minutes, 1.5 minutes or so, what was going on in your lives when you met, how you came to meet, etc. Maybe kind of create some color around that question for us. So that will then kind of create questions that might come in towards you.
Well, we met in college. We were both 19 years old. We got married when we were 20 in Ohio. You had to have your parents' permission to get married if you were not 21. Pat grew up as a Roman Catholic. To my father, who was a conservative Protestant, that was like being an alien from another planet. He said, "You will not get married." Her father said, "You will not get married. It's not going to happen over my dead body." We said, my roommate will let us use his car. He'll let us drive to Michigan where you can get married, I think, when you were 14. I'm not sure about that. But
so really, it's a marriage of rebellion, Dick, is really what you're explaining here.
So we got married when we were 20, went through college, then I went into the Air Force and went from there.
Okay, awesome. Kevin, Jennifer, which one's going to answer this first question?
See, that's how we work through conflict. We were just deciding who's going to talk.
That's good.
So I was raised in a home where my mom was a believer, and when I was about 10, my dad found the Lord, and he was a NASA engineer. So I got to watch him go from a literal rocket scientist with a little bit of a temper to someone that earnestly followed Christ. So that was kind of my story growing up. And I got to watch the pursuing of Christ from the age of about 10 till I left home at 18. Jennifer's dad spent his career flying everything the Army has to fly. And so that created all the usual stories of being a military family. Our parents my folks have been married like 54 years now, and Jennifer's folks celebrated their 52nd or 3rd anniversary before her mom passed about a year ago. So when we met, I was finishing my residency in Temple, Texas, and Jennifer graduated from Texas A&M and was doing an internship at the hospital as well. And so we met in February and had our wedding on December 17th. So we knew each other 10 months before we got married.
Wow, it's awesome, love it. All right, Zach and Ann, which one are you going to answer this question? All right, here we go.
So we came from very different places. She came from West Coast, up in the Pacific Northwest. I came from Nebraska. And we both came out here for what at the time was called Focus on the Family Institute. So she was finishing up her college degree. I'd already finished, but it was a semester-long thing. So we ended up meeting there. And then we both decided that we loved Colorado. So we decided to stay independently and then got to know each other a little bit more. Yeah, so we started dating in June and then got married the next June, and yeah, it just kind of went from there.
All right. All right. Well, let's start in the middle, and then we'll work out in terms of questions. And so it can be you, Jennifer, or Kevin. We'll maybe direct this first one to Kevin. Kevin, you have a unique angle on maybe even sexuality, certainly bringing life into the world. I want to ask you a question on that later. First, though, I want to ask you a question related to marriage. What would you say were one or two things that you have to be aware of, personality-wise, coming into a marriage with Jennifer to where you were different, to where you've had to really work on something of your personality that you brought into the marriage and something that she brought into the marriage to where you brought that difference to make it into something redemptive?
So I'll answer from my perspective.
And then we'll have
let
Jennifer
do her perspective. I think I just shared my dad was a rocket scientist with a little bit of a temper before he found the Lord, and some of those things don't fall far from the tree. Now, I don't want to make this bigger than it is, but this is the most important relationship in the world right here, second only to my relationship with the Lord. And the 2,000-page book that we're supposed to use for instructions has very few specific instructions about how to be a husband. But there's a very specific one in Colossians that says, husbands, love your wife and do not be harsh with her. She deserves the best I have, my most patience, my love, compassion. But how often, the Bible tells me to be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slower to become angry. How often, though, do I not listen or interrupt and respond in anger and harshness instead of the love? So that is something that I suspect half the men can join me with in the room. That is something that we struggle with, and it becomes a point. It's become a point where every day I pray, God, today let me be the husband that you want for your daughter. And let me love her in the right way, and let me not be angry, and let me not be harsh.
Jennifer, how did you handle that in maybe the early years where it wasn't what you wanted, maybe, in every way?
I have to give a little rebuttal. Kevin is such a kind and compassionate man, so take what he's saying with a grain of salt. He's a good, kind man. I know when he comes in and is grumpy or tired, I can tell. But I feel like maybe that's kind of more of a personal conviction than me feeling often like he's harsh or anything like that. I will say, growing up in a military home, I don't think Kevin really hit it well. My dad was an attack helicopter pilot. He was 6'6", 250 pounds. I grew up in a military, pretty rule-oriented, kind of rigid home. And I remember there being conflict when Dad would be away on tour and then would come home. And Mom had been taking care of everything. And so Dad would come back, and you had to reestablish the hierarchy of the home. And so there was conflict. But growing up in that home, I think I learned to, super high work ethic, which is a good thing, although you can work and work and work, and then that becomes your worth. And so your worth is determined by how you perform and doing. And I think I came into the marriage with a lot of that, feeling like I had to be doing in order to have worth. And I feel like the Lord, over the 23 years, it's still a growing process of learning that my worth is simply because I'm his child. And so I have inherent worth, and that, and the grace that can come with that. I'm only saved by his grace. Whether I do really well or really poorly, I'm saved by his grace, And so I think that would be what I have had to work through in all those years. Hopefully I'm really far from where I was, but...
Right. What does that mean practically? Help us unpack that. Like, what does it mean to, like someone said the phrase earlier, I take it to the Lord. What does that mean if you have no framework for that? What does that look like? You take it to the Lord? Like, what does that look like for you?
Pursuing God and my relationship with him first. So I am diligent about my time with the Lord, spending time in his word and fleshing out maybe the lies that I learned. And I adore my parents. You know, I have such respect and love for them, but I am a product of the home, the style of home that I was raised in. And so honoring my parents and yet saying, you know, what lies and things have I learned out of growing up in this environment, kicking those lies out and saying, what is your truth, Lord? I am your child. I am salt and light. I'm your masterpiece. And just reaffirming his truth in place of the lies.
That's awesome. That's good. That's good. Really good. Anne, question, Zach. So you guys have been married, did you say 12 years? 10 years. 10 years. And you have a bunch of adorable little blonde boys that run around, just awesome, striking boys. What were the first few years of marriage like? Speak to the surprises, the pain, the joy. Kind of paint a picture of reality in your life.
Yeah, so our first few years of marriage, or first year of marriage was terrible. It was terrible. I am a super emotionally driven person, and growing up, I feel like most women or girls are even like, you know, someday you're going to meet that man, and he's going to fulfill everything that you're missing in your life. You're going to feel like a whole person, right? Well, come to find out that person's Jesus. So,
and he's not available.
And
that
you
way.
can't marry him. Yeah,
You
can have a relationship with him, which I didn't. I mean, I grew up in a Christian home, but I just very much didn't want to. I didn't want to get punished. My brother was pretty rebellious, so I was like, okay, if I just do these things, these are the right things, then I can avoid punishment. And so, so when Zach and we almost didn't get married, actually. I don't know, 2 weeks before, my emotions, like I knew I loved him, and I knew I wanted to spend the rest of my life with him, but my ideal of everything, how I was going to feel, did not match with that. And so I brought it to the Lord because I was like, this is what I do, and this is how the people in my life are going to keep me accountable. And he was so clear. He brought, what was it, Exodus 15:14, when Moses was like stuck and the Israelites were stuck, and I was like, I feel really stuck right now. And the Israelites were yelling at Moses, you know. And the Lord told Moses to tell the sons of Israel to go forward. And it was like clear as day, get married. And so so we got married, and then, man, I had health issues. We had people break into our car. We got pregnant. And I was like, there were so many things where it was not, you know, fulfilling any of those movies that I had seen. And so it really brought me to a crisis of faith, honestly. And when we got pregnant in January, I was like, I'm going to be a single mom. Like, we're not going to stay married. I mean, and I grew up in a home where my parents were like, I guess this is a Ruth Graham Bell quote, but divorce never, murder maybe. And so it wasn't an option, but for me, it was becoming an option. It was very much like, I can't deal with these emotions, and I don't know what to do. And so the Lord met me March 13th of our first year.
Wow.
And we ended up miscarrying that baby, which at the time wasn't painful, because I was like, oh, I you know, all these emotions. And
maybe a relief, was
it? It was a relief, yeah. And then, so I became a Christian, and then the next month, we got pregnant with Malachi.
Wow.
So, and I think the Lord knew, well, he did. He knew that we needed to start a family to continue to grow together.
Wow.
And so we just kept having kids after that.
You figured it out, and now you're just keeping Mr. Weary in business, getting his kids through college. I love it.
Yeah, and I guess, sorry, one more thing. Just during that time, I also wrote out what we call truth cards, because my emotions were not lining up with how I knew I felt, the truth I felt about Zach. And so I just had these scriptures and things that I loved about him. And so when those emotions would creep up of, I can't do this, what am I thinking, you know, I wasn't thinking, I was just feeling it all. But
Wow.
what is the truth? This is what God has for me.
That's so good.
This is the man he has for me, and I will continue on, and he will sustain it.
Zach, I have a question for you, and I'm going to come to the Sevets. Zach, this is going to be a vulnerable question, and you can redirect it as you choose. What did you do wrong in the first few years to really?
Everything.
This is the good part about asking the questions. I'm like, I would not want to answer this question. And in all seriousness, you can redirect as you feel appropriate. What mistakes did you make in the first few years of marriage where you didn't validate in a way to where Anne felt loved, based upon your more logical, I would assume, scientific brain? What did you do wrong to what you've now learned? Because here's how I want you to answer this question. For all of us that are still doing it wrong, what did you learn? What do you do differently now?
Yeah, so much to say. No, yeah, it was a very learning time, and yeah, it was humbling too, because coming into it, a bit of a perfectionist as far as some of that goes. I mean, really like tend to not try things unless I'm going to do well, or things are going to succeed, or things like that. And so, for there to be so much struggle, so much of that the first year, it was like, oh man, I mean, what's screwing this up? And so it was kind of a balance and a learning, I think, with how emotion driven she was. I didn't have any sisters, so I didn't get to practice on them or anything.
You're crazy. What's wrong with you?
Lucky them. So, but so it was a blend of like learning how to validate the emotions appropriately, and at the same time, there were a lot of times where, I mean, she really challenged me in that a lot, and she'd call me out, "You're not validating me," and so then I would work to do that, but then learning how to challenge her with truth at the same time, and to call out the emotions that weren't based on truth, and because of the logic that is sometimes the curse, the Lord being able to use that, I think, to speak into her, but definitely not doing it well. And because of the logic being, I think she saw me as very emotionally removed. We call it emotionally constipated at our house. So,
It's just in there, it just hasn't come out.
Yeah, it's not coming.
And it's not coming.
But yeah, so I think that was kind of a lot of the wrestling match
Yeah.
for us.
Yeah.
So and her with me, putting up with me.
All right, Sevets, for fear of Pat falling off that stool, because we haven't hit you hard. Yeah. All right, here we go. Pat, you came up and you affirmed even last weekend's content on sex in marriage and the need for that to maintain a healthy relationship. You know my utmost respect as you're like grandma in our church. God has used you in a powerful way. Speak into marriage from your view of how you have valued the purity of your relationship with Dick, to where you would now say, from a sexually intimate way, through a relationally open way, through to spiritually growing together. If you had 2 minutes to speak into all of us and say, this is some stuff I've learned, what would you say? Drop truth on us.
Okay, first of all, intimacy, I think, is extremely important in your life. And whatever age you are, and Dick and I aren't dead yet.
Okay. That green room is free if y'all want to just head off stage for a moment. Just saying. Maybe we have to have Bobby and Rachel leave, but anyway, just kidding. This is what I want, by the way, because I want us to laugh about some stuff that, quite frankly, is painful for a lot of people. This is good.
God put a man and a woman together to be husband and wife. And that's the only way you can have a true marriage. He kept us happy with each other, wanting to please each other. And I do have to admit, Dick, when he was in the Air Force for 20 years, I was with him that whole 20, and he was gone a lot. And it was hard when he was gone. I missed him terribly, and the only way I could get through that time was to just be really active. Active in activities, active with friends, doing things, because otherwise I would have gone crazy. Through the years, I mean, I loved him dearly when we got married. I still love him dearly 53 years later. And some people find that that's probably a challenge. But he's just been a good guy. If it wasn't for God in our lives, though, I could see us having been divorced many years ago. And God is above all.
Killed me. Or should. It's the second time that's come up. There's a reoccurring theme here of violence.
But I do also, two things I think are really important. One is that you respect your husband as the head of your household. And to me, this means that Dick and I discuss everything, all the money situations and everything. But the final decision is his. Whether it be investment, whether it be buying something, whatever. And that's just always been in my heart. So he is the head of the household. And the second thing for me, if you have not read Proverbs 31:10, please do so. That's the kind of wife I've always wanted to be. And I hope that I am that kind of wife. And if you haven't read it, please read it.
That's really good. What you're describing in terms of headship works really well when the head, as Jesus says, just loves the church. And as we love our wives, that's when it becomes so appropriate, because at times, you know this to be true, we all know this to be true, that if a husband doesn't truly love his wife, it can actually become oppressive and not a beautiful picture of God's demonstration of submission. And I think what you guys model for all of us is you love each other, you pursue each other. Dick, I see you slap her on the butt. I'm just saying, I see you do it. This is a moment of accountability right now and affirmation. Good job. All right, here we go. Question, Jennifer and Kevin. We had dinner recently, and you both shared from your angle, from a medical but also a very trained educational level, of what appears to be and what is true to be a brokenness among sexuality. Kevin, let's go with you first. What do you see in your profession? Clearly, you do see the effects of sexual intimacy because you're bringing forth life. But I know you have a number of conversations with men and women that are expressing pain or longing in the realm of sexual relationships with their spouse. Maybe the question isn't framed perfectly, but can you speak to some of the factors that you see are present in the 21st century among men and women in marriage as it relates to sexual intimacy? What blocks it? Does it decline? How can you get beyond that? And maybe even speak to the health challenge if you cannot be intimate to some degree.
Great. We got about a week to go.
Yeah, exactly. Join us next weekend. We'll still be here. All right.
Just a little background. I've been in town 22 years. I'll see anywhere from 80 to 100 patients a week, and I've been doing that for 22 years. So, and the patients I saw when I first came were 16. They're now pushing 40.
Wow.
The 50-year-olds are now in their 70s. I've watched the young people fall in love and get married, have kids. 50% of them get divorced. And walk through all different things. So I'm speaking from experience of talking to a lot of families and a lot of women representing their families. I guess I'll hit on a couple things.
Okay.
Let me start with the end first, because I had an appointment last week with a patient that was in her 70s or 80s, and the questions that you get when you talk to your gynecologist are questions you don't get when you see any other kind of doctor. And I asked her about intimacy, and her husband was having health issues, and she basically, the way I asked the question was about intercourse, but that is not the way I worded it. And so she answered in such a way as well, some health issues, that's not. Says, well, okay, so the intimacy part isn't an issue right now. She was very quick to correct me, and it's not what I meant, but I really appreciated what she said. She was like, oh no, we are intimate all the time. So just because certain behaviors weren't able to happen anymore that had nothing to do with their physical intimacy, and that's something to very much remember. The two other things I think are worth mentioning is, in 22 years of seeing patients every week, I have not gone 1 week in 22 years without having a conversation about libido issues and about women and families struggling with the issues of differences between men and women and the struggle that creates in a marriage. And that is just real. It is, we are wired different. A guy has the worst day in work and he wrecks the car on the way home. He can get home and his wife goes, I know how to make it better, and gives him a wink. The day's all better. A woman has a typical rough day and just things aren't going well. It's the last thing on her mind.
Yeah.
So these are just differences between men and women, and in the crucible of marriage, as we're trying to become holy and more like God, I think he did this on purpose so that we can learn to love each other sacrificially and learn what it really means to give yourself completely to your spouse. So there's normal things that happen in marriages that people just need to walk through and figure out along the way. And they're normal and they're common. But I would feel like I was very remiss if I didn't mention one thing, that because I've watched people get married and get divorced and have these conversations, and I say this without any judgment, if statistics hold true, half the adults in this room have been divorced. But one of the most common issues of divorce is adultery. And very specifically, we've moved into the adultery of pornography. And it is just amazingly destructive. The enemy to marriage and to our lives together is pretty smart, and he's used a weapon that is amazingly effective. And if we are to love our wives as God loved the church and present them as holy before him, then our wives are holy, and our marriage is holy, and our bedroom is holy. And you cannot introduce pornography and it go well.
Yep.
And it needs to be completely avoided.
Yep.
And I would say that to the young people who aren't married as well. What you see and what you're experiencing in that realm is baggage that you'll take into your marriage, and it will not go well. And it's not real either. You need to know that what's portrayed isn't real. It's not what real life and real intimacy is like.
Yeah. Jennifer, this next question will be one that you'll be great to answer. It's a question from, I'm not sure if it's a man or a woman, but essentially they're saying they grew up in a Christian home. Obviously in a Christian home, we're told to wait for sex until marriage. Sex is maybe not talked about a great deal, and when it is, it's almost made into a negative thing. But then as soon as you're married, it's all fair game. So for a woman that has a negative view on it because of either an upbringing or, I'll add to the question, a negative view on it because of experiences. I know that God has used you to bring a lot of breakthrough and freedom to women in this realm. And again, like Kevin, I know you could talk for maybe a week on stuff you know to be true. What would you say to the young women in the room that because of a negative experience or because of an upbringing that is broken, struggle to experience intimacy now?
Wow.
Yeah.
My background, my training is in counseling, and so that's what Daniel's referring to. And I used to work specifically with women who had experienced sexual trauma at some point in their life. I would say, with God's grace, to work through the negative events of the past and allow grieve, targeted grief toward what you experienced, what should have been, so that you can release those emotions and let them go. I think a healthy sex life, I've seen it in women who've been horribly abused. It's possible, and it is to be enjoyed. And Satan wants to steal, kill, and destroy. And so he's trying to divide you and your spouse. But I think the key would be to pressing into the Lord and pressing in probably with some help, to your experiences, grieving the loss, grieving the trauma, and then putting God's truth and what He originally designed you for and was good back at the forefront of your mind. I'll sing now.
Whenever our services reach an hour mark, we always look for subliminal clues for people to stop talking. Just so happened to be the singing one this weekend. Just kidding. That's really good. That's really good. And there is so much to share in that regard. I would say, and I know you would say, to young women or young men that have experienced abuse, talk to somebody, find help, talk to somebody in a safe environment, a pastor, a counselor, somebody that can really, really help you. My last question for all of you, we'll start here and we'll come down. And maybe you need to converse prior to answering the question on this last one. If there were one thing, if there was just one thing that you could say, if we were to solve this one thing in our marriage, goodness, it would propel us to a new level. One thing. What is the one thing that you're prioritizing right now in your relationship to experience victory in, to move your relationship to the next level? If you guys are ready, we'll start with you. It hasn't got to be necessarily a long answer, but a pithy answer that would be pointed and challenging.
Okay, this is really a challenge because I'm pretty laid back, and there's not a whole lot that bothers me. But I know what really bothers Dick. So my challenge to myself this year is not to complain about his driving.
I guess when you've been married 53 years, some things don't change.
It's all a matter that I've seen this stop sign 5,000 times, and every time she has to remind me, did you see the stop sign?
You're like, yes, honey, it's for you to stop talking. No, I'm just kidding.
And from my
sorry about that.
from my perspective, I know that I hate it when she tells me, you talk to me like I'm an idiot. And I truly do not ever mean to say things like that. But I just have to stop, and if I could only think a few seconds before I say something to her, that I'm trying to communicate, and I don't do it really well sometimes.
Yeah. That's good. That's good. And we can just have one from each couple as well. So whichever one of these two, Kevin, you.
So Jennifer and I are blessed with 4 kids. John and Jess are with us today, Jackson and Keaton. John and Jess are 18-year-old twins. Jackson and Keaton are 14-year-old twins. So, you know, life is busy.
Yeah, that's awesome.
We have been so blessed in so many ways, but life is hard, and there's challenges each step of the way. And one thing that we're really, John and Jess are graduating this year, and that's beautiful and wonderful and incredibly hard at the same time. And so kind of the passage that our family is looking at this year is Isaiah 55, and you can read it later, but there's a couple lines in there that says, you will go forth in joy and be led forth in peace. And so our prayer for our family this year, and each step along the way, is that we can experience the joy of God's blessings today and trust that He is leading our family forth as a group and as a unit, but also as individuals, and to be able to face the challenges that go with marriage and go with family life, but to do it with joy and with peace and with a trust that His plan is bigger and better than ours.
That's good stuff. That's good stuff. Zach or Ann?
So ours was a little more broad as far as that. We kind of feel like we're the babies up here. So we're still at that stage where for us it's, we're still trying to become one. We're still trying to get on the same page on things. And so for us, we're just like, yeah, that's the thing. And so one of the things that we've been, we just finished going through a book in our small group, and it was a lot about in marriage kind of having that common mission. And when you're married, you're on a mission to get together. But it's one where the Lord kind of guides that. And so, but when you're focused on that, you don't get distracted by the little stuff that can divide. And so, I think for us that's the one thing. If we can join on that one thing, on the oneness, and whether it's
the miniature terrorists in the house or whatever it is, then the rest of it the Lord takes care of, and He continues to join everything and make the hearts right.
Love it. Good stuff. Without further ado, here we are, the panel for the 11:30 service. We're going to start on that end with David and Kara, and we're going to have you just at this first point say your name, how long you've been married, and then we'll just bounce down the line, and then we'll go back to the beginning and start all over again, and then dive deep. All right, here we go.
My name is Kara, my husband David. We've been together 22 years and married 15.
Awesome. All right, Trish. All right, you got the mic.
My name is Larry Putt. This is my wife, Tricia, and we'll be married 41 years in August.
Wow, love it. That's good stuff. It's good stuff. Kirk.
Kirk and Kelly Schaefer. We've been married 19 years and 2 weeks from now. 2 weeks.
All right.
And we dated for a year before that.
All right, so 20 years. Love it. Good stuff. All right, so to create context for the questions to start coming in, it would be good for people to know a little snapshot of how you met, what was going on when you met, because then that will fire off questions. People will go, man, I relate to Kara, or I relate to Larry. And so walk us through, one of you, whoever has the mic most likely, kind of a concise overview of what was going on in your lives prior to meeting.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you so much. I love this church, and we love this sermon series.
Oh, thank you.
So we were actually high school sweethearts. So I asked Kara to junior homecoming, and at that time was kind of a crazy period in our lives. My father had just passed away when I was 16, and Kara's mother also passed away when she was 6 years old, and through that process of a change out of a parent and her dad getting remarried, and the differences between moms and a stepmom in very authoritarian type situation, and so both of us were broken in kind of that aspect. But then I grew up in a Christian household, parents who loved me, and that really helped us both get through that situation.
Wow.
So,
thank you. I know we're going to come back to some stuff in there. There's a lot in there. Larry or Tricia.
So Larry and I met, we were obviously, since we've been married 41 years, we were super young.
Clearly. Almost illegally young.
Yeah. We were very young. Yeah. So we met at work. I was working at Sears and Larry was working at Sears. And Larry worked because he had to work. He had to help support his mom. I worked because my parents told me you need to get a job. So we met at work, and Larry's life was completely different than mine, but we started dating, and then we just decided kind of our life was not anywhere close to each other, but we worked through it, and that's how we met and stayed together all these years.
Wow, love it. And you have grandchildren.
Yes.
How many children and grandchildren?
We have 2 daughters.
Okay.
We have 2 grandsons. Our oldest daughter is just moved here a year ago, so she's getting acclimated to the area, and our youngest daughter is married with our 2 amazing grandsons.
Awesome. Love it. Love it. All right, Kirk, maybe create a picture for us.
Sure. So we came from 2 pretty much different backgrounds. Kelly came from a Christian home, husband and wife married, going to church every time the doors were open. I came from a family that was, my mom and dad were divorced when I was 2. My father ended up being married a total of 5 times, and mom 3 times.
Wow.
So not an exactly template for marriage. So Kelly and I met a little bit later in life, even though we came from very different, hers more idyllic, mine less so. We met in our late 20s, or 27, 28, and we were both single parents at that time. So we had both been married and had come through some struggles in that regard. So.
Can we continue maybe with this line of conversation? So then you both were unable to, or chose to see your first marriages end. Let's go with you, Kelly. Speak to that. Speak to some of the pain, speak to some of that loss, but speak to some of, maybe from your view, how you really sought to heal prior to this.
So my first marriage was, it was devastating for me. After dating my first husband for almost 2 years, a year of that, he really, really pursued me, and I was not thoroughly, in love or anything. But we got married, and right away, I knew that there was a big problem. I would say that our physical intimacy ended before the honeymoon was over. And he was a professional hockey player, so shortly after our honeymoon, maybe 2 weeks, we moved to Germany. He had a contract there, and it was a real struggle for me. I was trying to learn the language, and the only people that I really came in contact with were the other hockey players and either their wives or girlfriends, and so I had no real deep connection with anybody to kind of share what was going on. I didn't know at the time until later that he had a very serious addiction to pornography and had since he was an early teen. But for me, that played out in just a real feeling of rejection. I can't remember, after the honeymoon at all, I can't remember him making any advance toward me at all physically. I was rejected at every turn, whether it was seeking the physical intimacy or just even walking up behind him and putting my arms around him. He would literally shiver. And so that brought about a lot of, other issues about my identity. And so, but although it's not ideal, I think that we came into our marriage with an advantage that most people who, do it the right way and have one spouse, their whole life, we came into it with an advantage, and that is perspective. Perspective of failure, pain, rejection, for both of us. And I think through that, God gave us both a real sense of determination to make sure that we didn't do to our spouses what we had suffered. And so...
what does that look like for you?
The previous marriage? in
No,
particular?
the choosing to not subject Kelly to what you were subjected to in your previous relationship.
Well, again, even still, this was a completely separate and different situation for me and my previous marriage. I got married barely 18 years old, so I was married almost 10 years my first time. And the first and foremost mistake that I made was I was married to somebody who wasn't a Christian. And so I was saved at 14 years old, despite not having any Christian influence within my family. And so I tried to do a lot of my faith in my own flesh. I was trying to work out. And so when I met a girl who at least told me she was a Christian, I didn't dig deep into that. I didn't quite fully understand it myself because I wasn't doing it right.
Yeah.
And then we got married, and we got married because she was pregnant. So obviously I wasn't even close to resembling a Christian walk at that time. So I think for me, it was a little bit different, even though Kelly's first husband he did have some serious, significant issues that were crippling to their marriage. The thought is he was saved. And so that's kind of, I know that seems like a contradiction, but it was something he struggled with, and ultimately he ended up passing in a car wreck.
Oh, really?
But for me, it was just, it's when God in my early 20s really started working in my life and calling me to a genuine faith, to live out my faith, because I had 2 small children at the time. Really, that was really where my marriage started splitting. It was like a wedge. She started going in the complete opposite direction, and it was a bit of a struggle in that regard. So when I see some of those things, I didn't see any of those character traits in Kelly. She was a godly woman when we first met. We met at church. Actually, we met in a divorce recovery program.
That's awesome.
So,
good stuff.
Yeah, I had gone through the program and asked to stay on to be a facilitator, and Kelly was just looking to get Gabby, her stepdaughter, my stepdaughter, some help, some guidance, and she decided, okay, I'll stay and hang out and we happened to be in the same group, so.
Huh.
Yeah.
Wow. Look at the way God works it all together. Good stuff.
And so, yeah, your question was
Don't worry
relating.
about my question. I'm
Okay.
up here for... Your content's better than my question, I guarantee it. I guarantee it. No, it's good. I guess the question was, what you experienced in your previous relationship, how did you ensure that pain wasn't carried over and placed upon Kelly in your new marriage?
Absolutely. And so, don't get me wrong, I'm not going to say that I didn't do, or I did everything right in the first relationship. There were so many things that I learned that I needed to be doing.
Yeah. So it was an awareness of, it was a learning, it was an understanding of this I need to do differently.
But knowing where Kelly came from, I mean, this was all discussed prior to, just in our friendship. I learned about this. And in 1 Peter chapter 3.
Don't stop preaching, I've got other questions I've got to get to.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead and quote that scripture.
Yeah, so I quote it. But it's saying for husbands to live with their wives according to understanding and to honor them for the way that they were made.
Yeah.
And it goes on to say, do all this so your prayers won't be hindered. So when I look at some of the things that Kelly went through, I don't want our enemy to have a foothold in her mind. So it's important to me to ensure that every avenue she has open access to my life.
Yeah,
we have a computer in the family room. She has my phone. I don't fear, when I forget my phone at home. If she wants to look through it, look for it.
That's good stuff.
Her fingerprints right on the phone.
Yeah, that's good. Her thumbprint opens your phone. That's what I think ours does. Larry and Tricia, got a question for you as it relates to the differences that you both brought into your marriage. I would be led to assume that you're not identical in personality. I'm sure you're different. Speak to some of the challenges that you walk through in the early years or even today because of your differences.
Do you want to start? I'll start. Okay.
So for me, when I had met Trish, I was playing baseball at a small Christian school in Southern California, and I was an absolute idiot.
That surprised me.
To give you what kind of an idiot I was, I got a full scholarship to play baseball at this school, and I literally spent all the years at this school sitting in the back of the chapel during chapel service reading Sports Illustrated. I just literally blew that whole opportunity away to be saved at a Christian school. That's how much of an idiot I was. But then I met Trish, and her family values with her family was so genuine to me, and it was so Christian-based that it was just refreshing to be in that environment. And I'm not going to go into super detail on my environment growing up, but it wasn't good. My parents were severe alcoholics, and it's life. I don't hate them. I love them, till the day they pass away. But when I met Trish, it was just to see the other side of life and to realize what I missed before. And I actually became a Christian when I met Trish. I wasn't before that. So that's a little bit of my background as far as where I was in life at the time. You don't realize it when you're going through it. You think, hey, I got all the answers. I'm good. I can stand up to all this. I'm good. But, man, you got to have the Lord. That's all there is to it. So.
Yeah. You want to add anything, Tricia?
Yeah, so Larry being who he was, being raised in a home where he learned to protect himself at a very young age, protect his feelings, protect his thoughts, keep everything inside. It made it hard for us when we were first married because I want to talk about everything. I want to solve everything. I want it done. Let's talk about it, finish it, get it done. Well, Larry's not that way at all. He still isn't. We still struggle a little bit, but I'm better at it. I'm better at understanding that he needs his space to be able to think and be able to kind of come to his own decision. But I remember one of our major fights. I don't remember what it was about, but I thought, I'm going to get an answer from this guy. He is going to respond. So his big thing is he usually went out to the garage and worked on something when he was really mad at me. Well, I followed him all the way out to the garage, and I'm nagging him the whole way, no, right? And I remember we hit the garage door, and he turned around, and it was like va-voom, right? It was just, stop, in this really loud yelling voice. And I thought, oh, I finally hit the nerve that I never want to hit again. So through our trials and through our discussions and through all the things that we've done for the last 40 years, understanding where he is and how he reacts to things helps me.
That's really good. That's good for all of us. And you're not alone in those kind of interactions in marriage. That's the reality, isn't it, for all of us? It's actually when we are unwilling to admit that reality that we cause the reality to drive deeper and divorce and occur in an unhealthy way. So thank you. Kara, I've got a question for you. It's actually coming via text. How have you in your marriage created emotional intimacy? But also, there's a second and third part to the question. So answer the part that you recall. How do you stay faithful to David? And how do you overcome temptations that people have in marriage to not be faithful?
I don't think it ever was, even though my childhood was a little bit, was very rocky, my parents were faithful to each other, and it was rough. Like they had it was a hard situation for them. My mom coming into a marriage with 2 kids already, and that brought a lot of insecurities for her. And because my mom had passed away, there was this kind of jealousy issue that she had. Anyways, their marriage was very hard, but they stuck it out and they stayed together, and they're much better for it. And there's a lot of redemption in that story. So I think just their example, even though it was hard, they stayed and they stuck it out, and they still pursued each other. They have a child together now. And so I think for me, even though it's just never crossed my mind, you're faithful to your spouse. And we dated when we were 16, so there really wasn't, we've been together more than we were not together. And so we've grown together just in almost, in every aspect, from graduating high school to, having our children together. So,
awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. David, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, some wonderful advice that I received, it was probably right around when we were getting married, that's always stuck with me, is the idea of commitment, and a simple way to remember that commitment is to never say the word that starts with a D on ending marriage, 7-letter word. And I really try to make sure that I try never to say that word. And that also lends to never thinking that word, and knowing that there is no plan B, and never making a plan, never contributing to a plan D, because plan B would steal from plan A. We are married for life, and when we have struggles, as all marriage do, it's a crucible, and we have 5 little ones. I see some of them in back. But that's a lot of things going on, and there's plenty of opportunities for arguments and for stress, and through that all, there's one thing I don't ever have to think about. We are committed to each other.
It's good. I love it. Kelly, someone texted in a question for you. How have you walked through and worked through having your identity rooted in God instead of seeking it from your husband, your ex-husband that you described? And then how would we go about basing our lives upon God's truth and not our emotions?
Wow, that's a good one. I'll be honest with you. I still struggle occasionally now, not occasionally, the truth is all the time, with my physical identity or my physical appearance. I'm very just, I don't.
Kirk thinks you're hot. I'm just
Well,
saying.
I'm so glad.
We, as
I think
husbands,
he's hot
are all
too.
attracted to our wives.
You know, I have to say that as far as finding that my identity in God, in spite of at the time. Now, at the time, all I had was God. I lived in the German Alps. The only friends I had to talk to were the cows that I passed every day, and they were very supportive. But
You have a very strong German accent.
yes,
I hear your German
you
accent
do.
comes out
Okay.
a lot.
But at that time, the only person I had to turn to was God, and I did, and I cried out to Him. And you know, when you're in the midst of something like that, it is so lonely. And you know, I mean, I know I'm positive there are probably women in this room that are, you know, struggle with the same thing. This was, you know, 20 years ago. Today, I would say there may even be men who are struggling with wives who maybe are addicted to pornography or some other form of love, you know. But God, He carried me through. He carried me through the divorce. My husband ultimately was the one that chose to walk away from the marriage, and so I just dove into God's arms and let Him bring healing. And you know, I didn't think that I would ever marry again, honestly. And when the Lord brought Kirk into my life, He redeemed that time. And so, yeah.
Love it. That's really good. It's really good. I have a question for maybe Larry. The question has come in. In our marriage, we are both believers, but we come from entirely different denominational views. And it constantly creates friction over our interpretation of Scripture, but also even practically playing out faith in our marriage. What would you say to a couple that has that challenge in terms of disagreement over the nuances of faith?
Well, that's a good question right there. I would say that based on my background and Trish's background when we met, there was nothing for me based on Christianity. I didn't have a Christian family. It was never really mentioned. And so for me, being very much a non-Christian, coming into the Christian environment, it was such a wonderful relief for me to be able to experience that. And I think it might be the same with other couples. I mean, God is the centerpiece for everything. And I think if everybody realizes that, no matter what else happens, He's the centerpiece. He's going to make it work. He's going to help everybody through what your struggles may be. And it's interesting because when this happened in my life, again, I keep calling myself an idiot, but I'm like, man, you know, God is there for you. You just need to reach out. And if you reach out, He's there. He'll help you. He'll take care of it, you know. It's just a pride thing. It was just a thing where I hadn't been raised with that. And then when I came into Trish's family, literally, I was adopted by their family. It was such a reverse philosophy about life. So to sum it up, I'm no expert on this type of question by any means, but I would just say put God at the centerpiece and He'll work it out.
Camp out on the big things. Kara, question for you. You're a busy mom, 5 kids. What of your history have you had to redeem in your own story?
So I think with our kids, I do everything opposite of what I grew up with. So David would say it's to my detriment, where I love our house being full of joy and kids, and So I think there's a lot of redeeming factors that I've chosen forgiveness over a lot of the situation that happened in my childhood, and that God has really redeemed that whole situation. We have a great, our family is good now, and so yeah, with our kids, we love our family, and
Are you describing that you want your home filled with life because you felt like it was lifeless?
Yeah,
You want a lot of activity because it was?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so
And how does David want time where you're like?
he goes to work.
Yeah. But is the fear, what is the motivation?
Well, I love having people in our life. So I love our home being open. I just think it wasn't like that for me growing up. Our home was quiet and just kind of an oppression upon it. And so I want our kids to feel like our home is open to all their friends, and I like people being in our home. So.
That's good. Trish, you have a question, just came in. And then this will be the last personalized question, and then we'll come with one final question for all of you. Trish, what is your advice to those wives who follow their husband, who they feel like they're constantly nagging, and then it heats up into a significant situation? How can a wife avoid reaching the dangerous nerve of her husband?
Yeah, so I've tested that a lot in my life. So for me, because I'm more aggressive than Larry, and I need an answer, and I want it done, and I want things done. I found that if I just step back for just a little while, step back and think, what is the purpose of what I want? Why am I nagging? Am I nagging to take the trash out? Well, okay, so I get that. The trash needs to go out. But at some time, like, what does his day look like? Or what is going on in his life? What is making him not take the trash out? Because to him, that's, just got to take the trash out. But for me, it's like, no, you need to do it right now. And he's like, well, I'll do it later. No, now. And so that I have to calm myself, and that I take upon myself to correct.
Yeah.
The main things, the big things that really bug me, I find if I let Larry know that it's for my safety or for my welfare, he jumps on it right away.
Yeah.
He'll take care of anything that keeps me safe. So keep that in mind. The nagging stuff, it really doesn't matter when your husband is the one that's saying, I'm going to keep you safe no matter what. I'll do what I can. The trash is not keeping you safe, but the gate not working is keeping you safe.
Yep, I get it. I totally get it. Okay, so we'll go down the line. We'll start with you, Kirk. So you might need to converse. This is the final question of the weekend. So throughout the weekend, couples have conversed on the answer. So I'll stall as needed. What is one thing that if you could solve this one thing in your marriage, you would go to a new level? The one thing. What is the one thing? You could tweak it, change it. It's got to be a complete overhaul. But this is the issue that you would agree upon, that if we can solve this, man, we can move beyond who we are currently.
It's a trap.
It's a trap? Yeah. Go ahead and converse, otherwise your spouse will likely go, that is not the one thing, dang it. This is the one thing. It's you. No, I'm just kidding. If you guys have conversed, I'll go with someone that's ready. All right, Kelly?
Okay,
go.
so we sat in on last service. We knew this question was
Ah,
coming.
oh,
and
cheating.
so, and we have
I
had
see,
time
cheating.
to discuss that. This is not an answer to that question exactly, but I think because of the perspective we have from our past marriages, we came into our marriage determined to put the other first, always. For me, I was determined that my husband I would never reject him physically, unless, barring extenuating circumstances. But in return, there's a flip side to that. He fulfills me in ways that I need to be fulfilled. And so I want to encourage with this. In our premarital class, they gave us a list of things you should always do from anywhere from if you are within arm's length of your spouse, you should make contact with them. There's no excuse, period. Even if it's
like a backhand.
right.
Like a,
But the second thing that they told us was that we need to be praying for and with our spouses every day. And so that really touched something in us. And so we put that in our vows. And in almost 19 years, because of him and his determination, his willpower, we've never missed going to bed at night and praying with one another and for one another. And so I think that is got to be the glue that has taken our relationship to this level.
Amen. All right, one thing. Larry, Trish, what would you say?
I would say that if we could have more grace for each other, that would be a wonderful thing. And that's a broad scope of different actions and ideas that we would have. Just, I guess, patience, grace, realizing, like Trish said earlier, what each person is going through in their daily activities, or how they feel, or, you have a sinus headache today, you have a cough. I mean, it's simple stuff, but just asking and realizing that, maybe they're having a tough time with certain things. And to me personally, I think I take her for granted because I think she's really tough about stuff. But then I got to step back and go, what are you doing? She's not that tough. She's your wife. So to me, it's just grace. It's just having more grace for each other.
It's really good. Whoever's going on the end, the costs.
Yeah, there's so many things going through my mind. I'm going to switch up what I place high importance on families, and specifically fathers.
Is this the one thing you're working on? This is the one thing you two are working on?
Yeah,
okay.
It'll tie it together.
Yeah. I don't want you to do like the Schaefers and just take your own questions. I'm just kidding. Go justify my existence here somehow.
Well, so communication is the key, and how a father can mess that up is by being passive. And in our busy life with 5 kids, it doesn't matter how many kids you have, we can kind of just go with the flow versus really engaging. And part of that is putting down a phone, and it's spending time together, talking, as a previous sermon talked about, just spending time communicating, and little things like, what does our day look like? What child has to get where? Those are perfect opportunities for strife if you don't communicate those things and work those things out. And so it's really taking the responsibility for me to engage and to be involved and to commit to working on that. I can only control my actions, and that means that I need to make sure that I'm communicating and working through that communication.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Awesome. Well, let me close in prayer. Father, thank you so much, God, for even the richness of this conversation to each one of us in our story, the uniqueness of our story. Father, I just pray that God, as the Schaefers, the Putts, and the DeCoste have really spoken into even our lives, even this past 30 minutes, God, that we would grow. God, that we would make a commitment to growth. We'd make a commitment to purity and holiness in our relationships. And Father, whether it is complicated, or in some way filled with strife, or in a chapter of great growth and joy, Father, we thank you for where you've got us, and we pray, God, for growth in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Can we thank these guys?